Hello everybody, welcome back to CEC Live Gurukul program, and we continue our discussion about the various thinkers, the various scholars and writers. The focus, as you know, in the series on text is on the actual text. The idea is to go back and revisit and understand what exactly these thinkers were writing, train ourselves to read the actual text, the original texts that were written. Today we are going to do Emile Durkheim, The Rules of Sociological Method, which was published in 1895. This is a familiar name, especially for people who are doing sociology. He was a French sociologist, and the effort that he makes in the Rules of Sociological Method is to outline and demarcate a sphere which he calls the social as a specific phenomena independently worthy of investigation and separate from other spheres of social sciences like psychology and other phenomena. So the Rules of Sociological Method is very interesting because it's written in a very systematic way, one chapter followed by another chapter, outlining that if we have to practice sociology, what are the various procedures that we have to follow. The first chapter are what are the facts which should be termed social. And he says that before we begin the search for the method which is most appropriate to the study of social facts, it's important to know what are the facts which are termed social. A theme which I've constantly referred to in my discussions in earlier lecture is there is a fundamental break between what we understand as common sense knowledge and social science knowledge. In common sense, what we mean when we say the term social, what we mean is somebody who is perhaps friendly, wants to interact with other people, etc. But when we discuss the concept social within the social sciences, within sociology in particular, we have to be more precise. We have to delineate very clearly which facts should be considered social and which facts should not be considered social. In other words, there is a certain method. What is a social fact? And I read out this little quote to give you a sense of exactly what he is trying to indicate or explore. When I perform my duties as a brother, a husband, or a citizen and carry out the commitments I have entered into, I fulfill obligations which are defined in law and custom and which are external to myself and my action. This is a good example. He is trying to come to a theoretical or conceptual fact, drawing from something which we are very used to. As most social thinkers or sociologists of that period, they were in a certain sense, whenever they would give certain examples, it would always be men, brother, husband, citizen. But you can turn it around and say that if I have to perform my duty as a sister, a wife, then what should be my commitments, what should be my role, what should I do? How do I know how I should be a good wife or a good sister? I learn it from the customs and laws which are already in existence. From the time I grow up, I am taught this is what a good daughter should do. This is what a good sister should do. This is what a good wife should do, or a brother or a husband. The reason I was not using the word citizen when talking about women, because very often in the earlier periods they did not think of the woman as a citizen at all and thought her primarily in her domestic role. But forget these examples, I just wanted to sensitize you to the gender dimension of it. But to return to what is a social fact, the central point that is being argued, that we learn to be who we are, to perform the duties that we ought to do from external sources. Those duties, those responsibilities exist independent of us, even before when we are born. The second point that he talks about is when we conform to the sentiments and when I feel their reality within me, that reality does not cease to be objective, for it is not I who have prescribed these duties, I have received them through education. For example, the idea that we must look after our parents, or the idea that, look, a girl must sacrifice her career for the greater good of the family. Now, you may not feel that pressure of doing so. You may say, for instance, nobody pressurized me to leave my job, but I did it because I felt like. Nobody pressurized me to keep my home or look after everybody in the way I'm doing. I'm doing it because I feel it. The question of subjective feelings to do so. The point that Durkheim is saying, so yes, you may feel so, therefore you don't feel the pressure, but that does not change the fact that I have not created those obligations or duties. I have received them through education. I want to be like that because that is what I have learned through the process of socialization and education. This question of externality, that social facts are external to the individual, is further buttressed by arguing the believer discovers from the birth ready-fashioned beliefs. They exist before us, they exist outside us. Even the system of signs that I employ to express my thoughts are already existent in society. So I do not decide which language I must speak, which religion I must follow, which set of beliefs I should adopt. They are existent in advance depending upon the family or the group whom I am born into. They are, even the language which I speak, even the sign, the sacred signs that I deploy are already independently existing, external to the individual. The monetary system, how I pay money, the cash transaction, the credit card today, the commercial relationship, the practices I follow in my profession, all function independently of the use I make of them. I as an individual have to learn how to use a credit card, how to pay my money online, how to come to a particular lecture of this and how to use a PPT. They exist independently of me. These functions independent of the use I make of them. This PPT, the technology of online programs, exists independently of me. I have to follow the rules accordingly depending upon its needs. The first point, therefore, that they are external. The second point about social facts, they are coercive. Not only are these types of behavior and thinking external to the individual, but they are endued with a compelling and coercive power by virtue of which, whether he wishes it or not, they impose themselves upon him. They are coercive. So supposing I decide not to speak in my own language as I grew up, but maybe in German or French or whatever, others are not going to understand me. If I go to school and decide to speak in the language which other children do not speak, they are not going to understand me. I have to comply. So they are coercive. Over a period of time, even if you go to a foreign country and you don't know their language, over a period of time, you are perforce forced to learn that language. There is a certain element of compulsion or coercive. External, first point; coercive, second point. When I conform, no coercion is felt. And this is a point I've already dealt with, that supposing I want to sacrifice my career for the greater good of the family or the larger network of people who are relatives, I may say that I am not being coerced. I am doing it voluntarily. Deep in my heart, I may also feel that this is the right decision. The point that Durkheim says, that when I agree to the dominant ideas which are around me, I will not feel the pressure. But supposing the pressure or the dominant view is that I must not continue with my job and I insist on doing a job, then I will feel the pressure. If the dominant views is that I must dress in a particular fashion, and if I conform and do it according to the expectations, then I will not feel the coercion. But if I rebel and do something different, then I will feel the coercion. This is the basic question, that when I conform, no coercion is felt. this leads us to the third aspect. So first, the question of the general nature of social fact, external nature of social fact, coercive nature of social fact, and the question of not feeling the pressure if you confirm. Now we come to resistance. The fact that we confirm does not mean that this is not external. The proof that there is a coercion is when I try to resist, that when I insist on doing a job, even when the family member says that you resign and don't continue. When I violate the rules of society, the rules of law will react against me. Then people will disapprove, they will sanction, may have critique, they will criticize, and they will try to see if they can make me change my decision. They annihilate, they keep trying to make my action conform to the norm if it is already accomplished, but capable of being reversed. So the pressure to come back to the norm is extremely, extremely serious. Social facts, therefore, if we have to define, and remember, all this is from the original Durkheim. Social fact consists of manners of acting, thinking, feeling. So it's not just ideas, but it's behavior. It is what we think, what we feel, consists of manners of acting, thinking, feeling, external to the individual, which are invested with a coercive power by virtue of which they exercise control over him. Consequently, they consist of representations and actions. They cannot be confused with the idea that there is something which is psychological or psychical in the individual. They actually, social facts, constitute a new species, a new entity, and therefore this should not be confused with anything which lies within the individual. This is external, this is general, this is coercive, and if you oppose them, there will be resistance. Coming forward with this nature of social fact, he introduces the critical role that education and socialization has. It is sufficient to observe how children are brought up. If one views the facts as they are, and indeed as they have always been, it is patiently obvious that all education consists of a continual effort to impose upon the child ways of seeing, thinking, acting, which he himself would not have arrived at spontaneously. When you take care of a child, you're constantly telling the child, don't sit like that, don't slouch, sit properly, somebody older than you have come, touch her feet, touch his feet, get up when somebody senior comes in, don't misbehave, don't speak loudly. There are many ways by which we bodily and mentally shape the way the child thinks, behaves and feels. In this, he introduces the concept of habits. From the earliest years of our life, we oblige the child to eat, drink and sleep at regular hours, observe cleanliness, calm and obedience. Later, we force him to learn to be mindful of others, to respect customs and conventions and to work. We know that again with young people, that the young little baby comes, little baby decides that she doesn't want to sleep during the night, she likes to play at night and stay awake. And over a period of the time, parents, grandparents, siblings all try and coerce the child to sleep during the night and stay awake in the morning because that is the norm. We know about how reluctant sometimes young children are to bathe, and we say, no, you have to have a bath, you have to be clean. So the child learns that later on in their life, they will not go out without having a bath. They will not do many certain things without being clean. We not only teach them bodily habits, but we also teach them that they must be obedient, never questions perhaps. So very often, if we are brought up in a very conservative, authoritarian kind of family, we are taught, don't open your mind. Children shouldn't open their mouth. Children shouldn't have own opinions. And in classrooms, sometimes teachers have to encourage such children to say, speak up, it's all right to question. It's important to question. In fact, real learning takes place only when you question. Now, this constraint, the fact that these habits become part of our lives is that we we don't feel the constraint anymore. Over time, this constraint in time ceases to be felt because gradually it has given rise to habits, to our inner tendencies which render it superfluous. So when you say it is my habit, you feel it's something which is entirely your own personal. It's something which is entirely individual. But the fact of the matter is the habit has also been socially constructed. We have already referred to the facts about the social facts being general, social facts being coercive, that you don't feel any coercion if you conform, and if you want to check that this is a social fact, you have to resist and there will be sanction and you will know that yes, this is a social fact. Finally, the question I've already alluded to before, that social facts are general. It may be objected that a phenomena can only be collective if it is common to all the members of society, or at least to a majority of them, and consequently if it is general. This is doubtless the case, but it is general because it is collective, that is more or less obligatory. Now, this paragraph may seem to you a little confusing. And the reason why he is clarifying what exactly he means by general is to clarify the fact that it is not general because each one of us believes it. For example, if the dominant view is that you should get up very early in the morning, and everyone believes that you should get up very early in the morning, each individual, 1, 2, 3, endlessly, 1,000, 10,000, every individual believes that you must get up very early in the morning. It is not general because everyone believes in it. That is the point Durkheim is saying. He is saying that this idea that getting up early in the morning is good exists independently of the individuals. It exists as a body of ideas which is collective and imposes itself on us. It is general, and therefore the individual is perforce forced to learn this, and therefore less obligatory. The point being said, because very often in common sense when we say generalize, we say look, A says that, B says that, C says that endlessly, and therefore we can generalize. That is not the point he is being made when he says general. The point being made is that it is generally existing as an obligatory fact in society. So individuals perforce have to follow it. So therefore social facts are external, social facts are coercive. If you do not resist it, you will not feel the compulsion. If you resist it, then you will feel the force or coercion. It is general. It is very far from being collective because it is general. It is in each part because it is in the whole, but far from being in the whole because it is in the parts. The same point that I just discussed, the fact it is in the whole, therefore it exists amongst all of us. Not that it exists in each of us and added together it exists in the whole. As you know, Durkheim's understanding that the whole in a sense is larger than the parts. We now come to the second part of this book. The first part is how do you define the social, what are the characteristic features of a social facts. The second is the rules to observe social facts. And the first and most basic rule is to consider social facts as things. That is something which exists independent of us. Before the first rudiments of physics and chemistry, so first thing, what do we mean by as things? And then he tries to explain that before we actually knew physics or chemistry, human beings already had certain ideas about the physical and chemical phenomena, which went beyond pure perception alone. Likewise, in society, even before we as social scientists or sociologists or political scientists study religion or study family or study kinship or study class or race or nation, already have ideas and perceptions about these phenomena. This is natural, is the argument that Durkheim makes. This is because reflective thought precedes sciences, which merely employs it more methodically. Man cannot live among things without forming ideas about them, according to which he regulates his behavior. So ideas and perceptions will exist in society. The point that Durkheim is saying here, that ideas and perceptions are also social facts. And very often these perceptions are inevitable. We already have an idea about what the family is, what religion is, what caste is. The point that he is saying is that, look, but if we have to really move towards the science of society, we have to get rid of these preconceptions and the ideology which we have about family. Take these various basic social institutions in our own society, that we have an idea that maybe caste is legitimate, that caste is something which is good. We have an idea that family is necessarily empowering. We may have an idea that marriage is necessarily harmonious. We may have an idea that class, the division of labor, is just and leads to greater efficiency. We have all these ideas before in advance. The reason we have them, and I quote, "Men did not wait on the coming of social science to have ideas about law, morality, family, the state, or society itself, for such ideas were indispensable to their lives. It is above all in sociology that these preconceptions are capable of holding sway over the mind, substituting themselves for things. Indeed, social things are only realized by men. They are the products of human activity. These ideas encompass us. These ideas motivate us. These ideas are very difficult to get rid of. So what then is, why is it so difficult?" And here Durkheim makes the most pertinent observation that this is so difficult to get rid of these preconceptions because there is an emotional quality of social facts. What makes emancipation from such notions peculiarly difficult in sociology is that sentiment so often intervenes. We enthuse over our political and religious belief and moral practices very differently from the way we do over the objects of the physical world. It's very difficult to feel as emotional or passionate maybe about a particular equation or a particular theorem in geometry, but it is, or maybe only for people who are involved in that study. But social facts about religion, nation, family, politics, each one of us may be enthusiastically and emotionally grounded in it. Consequently, this emotional quality is transmitted to the way in which you conceive and explain our beliefs. It's very difficult to justify. We'll say, "I believe this, this is right." But social sciences demand that we interrogate and question even those beliefs which are emotionally charged. This is a challenge to examination. For example, a proposition may not accord with our view of patriotism or personal dignity. It is therefore denied. Whatever may be the proofs advanced, we cannot allow it to be true. The whole idea of nationalism and patriotism was very dominant in Durkheim's France, as it is world over even today. And there was a great reluctance to subject it to any interrogation. But Durkheim is arguing, whether it be religion or patriotism, we have to study it. We must go beyond the idea that we cannot allow investigation in what are sacred belief systems. It is rejected, and our strong emotions seeking a justification for doing so have no difficulty in suggesting reasons which we find readily conclusive. We are just not open to study our own belief systems with the kind of ease we have perhaps to study the belief system of another group of people. We would be quite happy to be critical about the belief system of another group of people, but we would not use the same tenets to examine our own belief system. These notions, therefore, are very prestigious, but we have to learn how to get rid of this. The mere fact of subjecting them, as well as the phenomena they express, sometimes is repugnant. People don't like it. We have very strong emotionally bound ideas about the social, the phenomena. That is a very big challenge to sociology. And therefore, the point that Durkheim is arguing, it becomes very critical to define the subject matter. every scientific investigation concerns a specific group of phenomena which are subsumed under the same definition. Therefore, the sociologist's first step must also be to define the things he treats. And the things he treats could be the family with which we feel emotionally bound, could be religion with which we feel emotionally bound, could be the nation with which we feel emotionally bound. But the reason therefore becomes even more important so that we may know exactly what one's subject matter is. This is prime and absolutely indispensable condition of any proof or verification. So when I say I am studying the family, and some other sociologist in another part of the world is saying, I am studying the family, we have to have a common definition of what it means. It can't be dependent upon what our common sense ideas about what a family is. That maybe somebody belonging to an extended family will assume it means very large, extended. Somebody who is used to nuclear families in the West may think it is that. That is the point that Durkheim is saying we must not get into. We have to define a group of phenomena by certain common external characteristics. The subject matter of research must only include a group of phenomena defined beforehand by certain common external characteristics, and all phenomena which correspond to this definition must be included. So it is not our idea of the family, but an external characteristic feature of family. And he gives the example of crime to illustrate the point that he is making. For example, we observe that certain actions exist which all possess one external characteristic, that once they have taken place, they provoke on the part of society that special reaction known as punishment. Let me take 2 minutes to explain this. For example, if we don't define it by an external characteristic, I may describe something as a crime which somebody else may not think is a crime. I may think that beating up somebody's wife by the husband is a crime. Somebody else may think it's not a crime if they believe that it is the right of the husband to beat up their wife. Somebody may think it's all right to beat up children. Somebody else may think it's not. Under one set of people will therefore think this act is criminal, others would not. Durkheim wants us to avoid these discrepancies and identify that one external characteristic under which all these phenomena can be placed. So, in the case of crime, he argues that in every society there is some action which provokes reaction as punishment, strong punishment, and if it does so, we can then say it is crime. We constitute them then depending upon that external characteristic sui generis and classify them under a single heading. Any action that is punished is termed a crime, and we make crime so define the subject matter of a special science of criminology. Likewise, the same method can be applied to the family, not depending upon what I think is a family or what you think is a family. We observe within all known societies the existence of a smaller society outwardly recognizable because it is formed for the most part of individuals linked by blood relationship and joined to each other by legal ties. From the relevant facts, we constitute a special group to which we assign a distinctive name, phenomena of domestic life. So it is not defined by a kind of sense that it is a haven for peace or it is a place where the most cherished values are taught. Those are ideas about the family. He is saying take an external characteristic, observable that in every society you have a smaller society, so to say, which constitutes of individuals who are linked by blood relationship, putative or real, and they are joined together by legal ties, and we can say every such phenomena can be defined as the family. The criteria, therefore, is based on the nature of things, not upon my perception, not upon what I think, not upon my cast of mind, but on the nature of things. The criteria which determines whether they are to be grouped in a particular category can be demonstrated and generally accepted by everybody, and the observer's statements can be verified by others. This is important. Supposing I go to a particular village and I say this is a family. Now, others who come to that village also have to recognize it as a family. My own ideas of a family may suggest I don't think this is a family, but it is not my ideas which will decide whether this can be recognized as a family or not. It is by that external criteria which can also be verified by others, that have you followed the strict rule that it has to be a smaller group than society, individuals were linked by blood or putative relationship, a legal entity. Are these criteria valid or not? And then we will know, yes, this is a family. We now come to another section of this book, where the question is rules for the distinction of the normal and the pathological. Remember, first we decided what is the social nature of social facts. We then came to know how do we define it and how do we demarcate or distinguish what is a subject of inquiry. Now we comes for the distinction for the normal from the pathological. For societies, as for individuals, we know health is good and desirable. Sickness, on the other hand, is bad and must be avoided. If, therefore, we find an objective criteria inherent in the facts themselves to allow us to distinguish scientifically health from sickness in the various orders of social phenomena, science will be in a position to throw light on practical matters while remaining true to its own method. The point that he is trying to argue here is that, again, we use the word normal and we use the word pathological even in our everyday conversation. If I'm very, very angry with somebody, I will say that I don't think you are normal. I think it's pathological. Or I may say that, look, somebody has decided perhaps to marry somebody outside their community or caste or maybe gender, or same-sex marriages, and I say this is not normal, this is pathological. Then I am doing something which Durkheim would strongly disapprove. I am using my own ideas of what is normal and pathological to make that judgment. He is saying, no, that is not the way to make the judgment or distinguish between normal and pathological. We have to go on the assumption that just as individual, health is good, sickness is not good. In a society too, a society should be healthy, a society should not be unhealthy, and it is that criteria should decide about the question of normal and pathological, not our cultural ideas of what is normal and pathological. There are three rules he gives for distinguishing between normal and pathological. A social fact is normal for a given social type viewed at a given phase of development when it occurs in the average society of that species corresponded the same phase of evolution. There are a couple of things here which you must notice. A social fact is normal depending upon the stage of development that the society is in, and it is an average norm in that society and it corresponds to the stage of development. That is the first rule, corresponding to the stage of development to the structure of society. The results of the preceding method can be verified by demonstrating that the general character of the phenomena is related to the general conditions of collective life in the social type under consideration. The social type, later on he introduces the concept of morphology, is very, very important to understand what is normal and what is pathological in a particular society. So, in a society where the division of labor is simple, then you would have behavior which has to be judged normal or pathological depending upon the nature of that society. So, if it is a society which has organic solidarity, complex division of labor, and you would expect that it is normal to have people who are very individualistic, if people start behaving in a collectivist fashion, then you would say that is pathological. That decision to call it not normal does not therefore depend upon your own bias or judgment or prejudice of what is considered normal or pathological. It depends upon whether it fits in with the average, whether it fits in with the structure of the society, the phase of development of that society. This verification is necessary when this fact relates to a social species which has not yet gone through its complete evolution. So, the 3 points that he is saying is that we have to connect it whether it is normal for this society or not normal for this society. So, in a modern industrial capitalist society, it is normal for everybody to want to have a job. It is normal for people to believe they are free and individualistic. And if suddenly there is a certain kind of order which comes on that society which says, no, it's not you who are so important, it is the society which is more important, you have to be coerced to what the society or the state is saying, there will be a disjunction, there will be a conflict between the expectations of the society and the expectations which are being demanded. There would be a certain kind of tensions. Going back to what may seem a very revolutionary kind of statement, which stems from his criteria of distinguishing the normal and the pathological, Durkheim makes the statement that crime is normal. In the first place, crime is normal. Why is it normal? Because it's completely impossible for any society to entirely free of it to exist. When you first hear this statement, crime is normal, you say, astounding, how can crime be normal? Crime is wrong, crime is abnormal. And he is saying the contrary. First point, that in every society there's some crime. And then he says that, look, we have to understand this criminality or the fact that it is normal only when the crime reaches a point where it is dysfunctional to society, then we can say it is pathological, and it would lead to a redefinition of what is criminal. Following from this distinction between the pathological and the normal leads us to the question of species of society, a point which we just looked at when Durkheim talked about deciding what is normal and pathological depending upon the species or the types of society and the stage of evolution within which it is. So, therefore, in Durkheim's Rules of Sociological Method, the constitution of social types or species is very important. I read out, since a social fact can only be labeled normal or abnormal in relation to a given social species, what has been stated up to now implies that a branch of sociology must be devoted to the constitution and classification of these species. Remember, Durkheim was also trying to establish the grounds for the sociological method, and he says that, look, since the social types or species is so central to the sociological method, this should be a core concern of sociology. And it is in this context he introduces the concept morphological method. It is known, in fact, that the constituent parts of every society are themselves societies of a simpler kind. A people is produced by the combination of two or more people that have preceded. The idea of morphology, that how do we find out, how do we classify society? We can't classify it according to our ideas that this is civilized or this is barbaric. That is proceeding on ideology, on the assumption, preconceptions that you have of what is civilized or what is barbaric. Here, the morphological method tries, in the Durkheimian sense, to indicate to a scientific manner by which a particular society can be defined. I read out, we know that the simplest society that ever existed, in order to make a classification, we should only have to follow the way in which these simple societies joined together and how new composites are combined. The simplest society, what were the elements? How did they get connected to each other? How did they join together? What was the composition? And how did these elements get reconfigured historically would be the study of morphology, leading us to the question, what is a simple society? The term simplicity can only, again, has to be precise, meaning when it signifies a complete absence of any component elements. A simple society must therefore be understood as one which does include others simpler than itself, which at present not only contains merely one segment, but which presents no trace of any previous segmentation. If you remember, he was influenced by the organic model, the biological model, that one cell, no further, only one cell. And as societies become more complex, the segments would do. So the earliest would be the horde, the clan, a social aggregate which does not include, never included any other elementary aggregate. Finding different properties that influence social phenomena. So now we've finished morphology and we come to the point of discovering the different properties of the environment which exerts influence upon us. Rules for the explanation of social facts as he comes towards the end of the book, that how do we explain a phenomena? The principal effort of the sociologist must be directed towards discovering the different properties of the environment which exerts influence upon us. The two sets of characteristics are, he introduced the volume of the society, the number of people, and secondly, the degree of concentration. And he introduces the concept of density. What is this concept of dynamic density? Can be defined if the volume remains constant as a function of the number of individuals who are effectively engaged. The question of a simple society, few people, undifferentiated, and a complex society where you may have much more dynamic density, complex exchange of services, competition, where you would have people who will have complex relationship and dependence, not as obvious as in simple society, but still there. Density and collective life. Every increase in the volume and dynamic density of society by making social life more intense and widening the horizons of thought and action of each individual profoundly modifies the basic conditions of collective life. So in a simple clan, a horde, a tribe, a small subcaste of a very small size in a particular place, you would tend to have ideas which are homogeneous, which you would tend to have ideas which Durkheim in this book itself calls parochial. But as the interaction becomes more complex, as the density and interaction is more intense and the horizons of our life changes, then it modifies the basic conditions of collective life. The idea of the universal, in fact even the idea of the university, is something which has to be something which is not parochial, where our minds are widened, our horizons of thought expand. Now, depending on whether the family is large or small or more or less turned upon itself, domestic life will differ considerably. Likewise, if professional corporations reconstitute themselves so as to spread over whole area instead of remaining enclosed within the confines of a city as they formerly were, the effect will be very different from what it was previously. Let us take a more contemporary example to make the point that Durkheim says. That traditionally, if you belong to a family, you would live in the same village. With greater interaction, division of labor, what would happen? The family gets completely spread over. Today in urban India, in large parts among the middle class, you would have diasporic families spread not just across the country, but families spread across the world. Likewise, at one point, you would have business concentrated in a particular city or a particular location. Now you would have global business spread across the world. It is something which is inevitable. And here is the whole concept that he has of morphology. The general and particular environment. More generally, professional life will differ according to whether the environment peculiar to each occupation is strongly developed or whether its bonds are loose, as is the case today. So even in our professional life, our ways, our mores, our norms would depend whether we are bound to each other in a very complex, in a very intimate way, or is it much more loose? The whole question that we now talk about individual space, we don't want people to encroach upon our individual space, indicates the role that the general environment would have on us, the pressure that it would exert upon the groups which causes the constitutions to vary. Finally, for the demonstration of sociological proof, he says that we have to have a comparative perspective. We must compare the cases and find out what is common in the phenomena, and depending upon whether it is present or absent, we come to a very careful decision whether a particular fact or a particular phenomena leads to another. All of you are familiar with his study of suicide, where he tried to make the causal relationship between the integration or the bond that exists in a society and the possibility of alienation that an individual may feel, or the inability of the individual to confine or share with others in a society which is more individualized, not so integrated, So here is the question of causality and the importance that Durkheim gives to the comparative method. If therefore we wish to use the comparative method scientifically, that is in conformity with the principles of causality as it arises in science itself, we shall have to take as the basis of the comparisons establish the following proposition. What is the proposition? To the same effect there always corresponds the same cause. It cannot vary. The same effect, the same cause. To the same effect, there always corresponds the same cause. If suicide depends on more than one cause, it is because in reality there are several kinds of suicide. It is the same for crime. So remember, he goes back and explains that we cannot explain a social fact of any complexity, save on condition that one follows its entire development throughout all social species. Comparative sociology is not a special branch of sociology. It is sociology itself, insofar as it ceases to be purely descriptive and aspires to account for facts. Maybe a couple of small points to sum up the entire argument that has been made in the Rules of Sociological Method. Very briefly, he is trying to say that, look, sociology studies the social, which is a very distinctive set of phenomena, and that, like any other sciences, you have to define what constitutes the social. It's in that order that he starts deciding what are the characteristic features of social facts, which we have meant external, coercive, repressive. There will be action if you protest against it, and general. He then goes on to the whole question that we have to have external criteria by which we decide a particular phenomena is something or not. Why external? The argument being that in society, just like in any other, even when it comes to physical or natural phenomena, we already have existent ideas about the phenomena, be it about the family, be it about religion, be it about caste, creed, community, nation, race, whatever. Now, the point that Durkheim is making and elaborating in the Rules of Sociological Method, that we cannot proceed on those ideas and assumptions that we have about this phenomena. We have to have external characteristics to define it. He gives the examples, therefore, of crime, and he gives the example of family, that we can't decide that this is criminal because I think it's criminal. We can't decide this is a family because I think it's a family. We can decide this is a crime if we have a kind of definition which says that in every society there are certain forms of action which generate hostile reaction and punishment, and we can say all such action would then be considered crime. Likewise, a family is not about our ideas or beliefs or emotions about the family, but the external criteria that in every society there is a smaller society, usually inhabited by individuals who are tied to each other by either blood relationship or putative blood relationship, and by legal recognition. This should hold good across communities and culture. There's a professional body of sociological practice. We can't arbitrarily decide what is a family or what is a crime. He then proceeds to the concept of normal and pathological, proceeding from his assumption of what is crime. And he says something again startling to hear at the start, that crime is normal. Now, when you say crime is normal and you are a little startled, you are startled because you feel crime is not pathological, crime is wrong, crime is unjust. But the point that Durkheim is trying to say that that is not the criteria by what we decide is normal. And his argument to the contrary is that in all societies there is some crime or the other. There is no society which is crime-free. Secondly, he argues that what is normal or pathological will depend upon the structure of society and the historical location of that society, or what he calls, which we normally don't use that word now, the species of that society. His choice of term species, his choice of term morphology, his choice of term evolution really stems from his theoretical framework of an evolutionary kind of framework, where he's talking about segments, a kind of organic analogy of simple and complex societies. And therefore, what is normal would be depending upon whether it is normal to the functioning of that particular species of society at a particular historical moment. The example he gives in the early part of the book is that supposing in a modern complex capitalist economy, monetized economy, I want to do barter. I want to go to maybe my mother dairy shop in the morning, and instead of giving cash or credit card or Paytm, what I say is, I've got 2 potatoes from my vegetable garden, will you give me an onion in return? It will not function. It is not normal. It is pathological. That is the point he is saying, that what is normal and what is not normal would be dependent upon its relevance and validity to the functioning of that particular society. He then, after he talks about why it is so important to define something which is social, he comes to the final portion where he says, how do we decide, whether a particular phenomena is causally linked to another phenomena? And the argument being put forward is that, look, the effect can only be related to one cause and not another. If there is more than one, that means there is more than one phenomena. This is the final question that he's coming to a conclusion. It's an extraordinarily wonderful book. I hope you'll go back to the original and realize why it helps us even in the contemporary period when we go around and start studying society. Thank you very much.